Good afternoon, everybody. How's it going? Hope everyone is fantastic. I don't know about you, but it's thundering at my house, so we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed that everything stays all good this morning. So my name is Stephanie Bourret. Welcome to the Coastal Land Trust Little Lunch Lecture for September the 11th. First, a couple of announcements are our typical announcements, but for the few first timers, want to just make sure that everyone knows we are recording and we're on Facebook Live today. So if you would like to click your video off, you may do that. If you would like to leave it on, please do that. We'd love to see your faces, of course, as usual. Let's see. There will be a couple links in the chat for you to check out, copy paste into a browser if you want more information or sign up on our e-news list. And finally, for the question and answer period, we will invite you to keep your microphones on mute for the whole lecture. And then at the end, if you have a question, please unmute that microphone and ask your question, and we'll have a good time at the end. If you feel more comfortable, you may, of course, use the chat to send that question out, and I will read that out loud to Bonnie. So either way you'd like to do that is fine with us. So our speaker today is Bonnie Monteleone, Executive Director and founder of the Plastic Ocean Project, a nonprofit based here in Wilmington, but with a global focus on the plastic pollution problem. Also an adjunct instructor in the UNCW Environmental Studies program, Bonnie has been a passionate researcher and advocate for reducing plastic in our oceans for more than a dozen years. Welcome, Bonnie, to the Little Lunch Lecture, and we're looking forward to learning from you today.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. What a great honor. And of course, we know that today is 9/11, and we have, always to remember what has happened in the past, but also what's happening today around the world, and especially in our country with these fires and hurricanes. And yeah, we've got a lot going on, and the environment needs our attention. And we all need to come together and work on this problem. So today we're going to talk about flattening the plastic curve, and I'm going to share a fair bit of information on how plastic plays a role in a lot of the problems that we're having, and also, what we can do to try to flatten this curve. So without further ado, let me give a little bit of background into the work that I've been doing. So Plastic Ocean Project is actually the name of my thesis as a graduate student at UNCW. I started this research in 2008. I was fortunate enough to work in a science building where I had access to not just chemists, but oceanographers and biologists, so I could really understand a lot of the complexities of this problem with plastic. And of course, a lot of that came out of my physical actions with being out on the open ocean. So this image that you're looking at, you can see that the ocean is much like our bodies, like stagnant, anything, bad things happen. So the water is constantly moving. And there are essentially 5 gyre circulation systems in our world oceans, and I have been to 4 of them. And these regions typically have a high pressure system in the middle of those circulation systems. So what happens is the water is most becalmed in these regions, allowing plastics to accumulate. Sadly, I've traveled now over 10,000 nautical miles, and we're finding plastic in the most remote places on the planet. And understanding that we weren't going to fix that problem with just my thesis, I decided to start a nonprofit organization, not only to explore this problem further, but also look at solutions, to get young people involved, to give them access to being out on the open ocean. So our motto is education through research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Outreach through art, and they say a picture tells 1,000 words, right? So we're working with young people, artists, videographers, to help communicate this problem and also the solutions, and then solutions through collaboration. So we have a program called ocean-friendly establishments, where we get restaurants to sign up to only give out straws upon request, right? We now have over 130 restaurants and establishments, not just restaurants, working on ways to reduce their use of plastic. So it really is a wonderful nonprofit, and we couldn't do it without the support from our local people as well as the students that participate in the work that we do. So I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about what plastic really is. And it's shocking how many people are not aware that it's made out of petroleum, coal, and natural gas. And when this raw material is brought in, it has to be heated between 900 to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really a lot of temperature, and it requires an enormous amount of energy. And with the plastics that are produced out of these materials, they also produce the chemicals. So the chemicals are also man-made. So the ones that allow plastics to be flexible or hard or resisting sunlight or figuring out ways to make them last longer in your dishwasher. There's an enormous amount of chemicals that go into plastics. Thousands and thousands of chemicals. And of course, many of these are known to be toxic. Now, the other interesting thing about these plastics is that they end up obviously in places that they don't belong. And because they're man-made, nature does not know what to do with it. So there are very few microbials that can actually digest this plastic, and any amount of time that works within the demand that we put on plastics. So when I talk about this demand for plastics, it's interesting. When I first started this work, I thought, you know, barrel of oil all went into energy, right? So it was either diesel fuel or gasoline or kerosene. Had no idea how much one barrel of oil is making a lot of things. So not just energy, but the polyester shirts that you're wearing, or the toothbrush, to every little thing that's made of plastic is coming out of some kind of fossil fuel. And when we start really looking at the quantities, and this is just based on a study from 2017, just in the United States alone, we use over 7 billion barrels, and that's not gallons, 7 billion barrels with a B of petroleum to produce our average consumption. So what's that add up to per day? It's about 20 million barrels per day that we're using of petroleum. About 6% of that is used to make plastic, which is about 1.2 million barrels a day to make plastics. So when we think about replacing plastics with other materials, there's probably not anything that we could use to satisfy that demand. And so it's going to take a lot of different ideas, a lot of different materials in order to replace the plastics that we make out of fossil fuels. So sadly, the petroleum and plastics industry is working very hard at increasing production of plastic by 40% over the next 10 years. They're throwing an enormous amount of money into it. And that's where we come into play, right? So you might notice that maybe there's not more stuff on the shelves, but each item that you're picking up might have yet one more little layer of plastic. So be mindful of that. So when we talk about flattening the curve, this is the curve that I'm referring to. So when I started this research, economics usually use the term like hockey stick, right? So the hockey stick, I used to say to people, let's break the hockey stick. And of course, it didn't get very far. People didn't understand really what I was trying to say. But now, because of COVID, we have a much better understanding of what the curve is. So this is the curve that we're up against. There is just an enormous amount of plastic that's being produced every year, and it's exponential, as you can see from this graph. Every year it goes up. Now you might notice that there's a little blip in this particular chart, and that's around 2010 when the market crashed. So why do we need to flatten this curve? So I usually wait for this slide at the end, but I thought I would put it at the front so you can kind of keep this in your mind as we're going through all of the ways that we're finding plastics and those impacts. So it's estimated that we lose about 1 million seabirds and 300,000 marine mammals every year to plastics, either through ingestion or entanglement. You can add another 300,000 of cetaceans, we're talking whales, dolphins, and porpoises, that are getting caught up in plastic nets as bycatch. And of course, there's more to this story because these plastics, as I have mentioned, have a lot of chemicals, and those chemicals will leach out. So when marine animals accidentally ingest those plastics, those chemicals then end up in the food web. Now, if we really don't care too much about what's happening to the marine life, we probably should be very concerned about what's happening with our children. So according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, they are petitioning our government to put in better safety standards for what's allowed to be put in plastics. And they're flat out saying that there are certain plastics that are worse than others. So 3s, which is PVC, has phthalates. Phthalates is a known endocrine disruptor. Your endocrine system manages every cell in your body. Number 6, styrene, another one that leaches a lot of these chemicals into our food and beverages that are known endocrine disruptors, as well as number 7s. So when you're looking at the packaging that you're eating and drinking out of, be mindful of these particular issues with these chemicals. Why is it a problem? According to this report, these chemicals are attributing to diabetes, obesity, cancers, behavior disorders, and reproductive issues. And why it's a problem for our children is because their metabolisms run much faster, and therefore they're more potentially impacted by these chemicals. Now, something that we aren't probably aware of to the general public, but more and more research is coming out about the greenhouse gases that are released from plastics. And in fact, we have done studies at UNCW looking at plastics when they're heated up and what kind of chemicals release from them. We've looked at things such as plastic utensils, which were actually the worst at releasing chemicals when exposed to heat. So low density polyethylene, that is like your food wrappers, your plastic bags, your plastic wraps. Polystyrene, which is styrofoam, but most people don't realize that even your Solo cup, right? And some of the hard to go containers, if you look at the bottom, you'll see a number 6. And that means it has styrene in it. And styrene, there has been a publication that says that really styrofoam and styrene should be treated as toxic waste. That's how toxic it is. PVC, another one we use for flooring, carpeting, shower curtains, and even some food packaging and our water lines. PVC is known as the poison plastic. It releases a lot of different chemicals such as dioxins, phthalates, vinyl chloride, lead, and cadmium. I know this is a lot of really heavy stuff, but we have to get through it. I promise there'll be some light at the end of the tunnel. So when we start looking at these plastics and what they're releasing, a lot of it is actually methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas. It is 22 times more potent than CO2. And of course, as the temperatures rise, those chemicals, those plastics that we have out in our yard or any of the plastics that we see on the side of the road are releasing these chemicals when exposed to UV light and heat. So when we think about the storms that unfortunately are becoming more and more consistent, we can actually attribute some of that activity, and we don't know to what extent, but some of that activity can be attributed to plastics in both the marine environment and what we have out in our yards. Oh, let me go back to this. So the slide, the image on the left is actually Hurricane Florence, and on the other side it's Hurricane Michael. And they came in within a week of each other, right? So these storms are becoming more frequent. And sadly, what you're seeing in the middle is Dr. Seaton's lab. This is where we had done a lot of our research. We lost our science building in 2018. And it had really been a huge setback for the research that we have been doing. So in the South Atlantic Gyre, which I travel with Five Gyres Institute traveled to all 5 gyres and then calculated the amount of plastic debris found floating on the surface. And their estimate was 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic. And of course, this was back in 2015, so we can assume that it's gotten much worse. With Hurricane Florence, you're seeing a photo here of stuff that came out of people's homes, right? So as they were flooded, all of that debris then gets left on the side of the road until it can get picked up. That means more stuff has to be purchased, and then there has to be some place for all this debris to go. The other side of the coin is the fact that this debris is ending up washing out to sea. So it's just one more way in which plastic is ending up in the environment. Now, according to the EPA, the #1 way that plastic is ending up in the ocean is through runoff. And I'm going to try to run this video, and Stephanie, tell me if it looks too bad. I'm just going to run it for only a couple of seconds anyway. But this is after a rainstorm in the Dominican Republic, and you can see CNN has picked up this story. So if you can imagine, because they don't have very good infrastructure, this is one of the problems. And of course, once it's out in the ocean, it's everyone's problem. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, most of the trash ending up in the ocean from the North Pacific or from Asia. But actually, these plastics are going to be going past our coast. In fact, I'll show more of that later. So the statistic that I gave you about the 5.25 trillion, that was just surface sampling, and it's very difficult to understand what's happening below the surface. This is a video that was shot by a diver, and you can see that the Nightly News picked this up. This is what's happening in the water column. So not all plastics float, and that's a huge misconception. So some of it will float on the surface, some of it will go straight to the bottom, and others will float just or maintain in the middle of the ocean. And why that's a huge problem is because we have these filter feeders that are going through, like you can see the manta ray there, that is just trying to pick up the small particles. And unfortunately, they're eating a mouthful of plastics. And because they can't digest those plastics, it becomes a huge problem all the way from our plankton down or up to the blue whales, the largest animal on the planet. So what about the North Atlantic? You know, we learned a lot about all these other parts of the world that are having this plastic problem, and it kind of gives us a false sense of security that the problem is over there. So the work we've been doing for the past 10 years has been looking at what's happening in the North Atlantic. And now I'm going to take you in another really weird direction because we're going to talk about sargassum. So what does sargassum have to do with plastic? Well, we didn't know any of this until we started looking at the North Atlantic, where we have the Sargasso Sea. This sargassum tends to aggregate the plastic. So when you look at the picture on the right, you can see that it's just beautiful blue ocean. But in the sargassum, it almost acts like a mop. It's picking up a lot of these plastic items and it becomes intermingled. Now, sargassum is an essential fish habitat. So it's influenced by wind and current, just like the plastics. And it's a floating brown algae. In other words, it has air bladders that keeps it on the surface. And then it'll aggregate in locations and becomes a marine habitat. Sargassum is considered an essential fish habitat and is actually protected by law. It has 81 invertebrates and vertebrates that are unique to the sargassum. In other words, it has its own population of organisms. And why that's important is because there are many juvenile species that go to the sargassum for foraging and protection. So when you think about our hatchlings, the sea turtles, it's exactly where they're going to because there's food available, and they can also hide in the sargassum until they're big enough to actually defend themselves. The other interesting fact about it, it does harbor a lot of endangered species as well. Now, with the work that we've been doing in the North Atlantic, it started in the middle of the gyre. But as I started following the sargassum, understanding that the plastic is intermingling in this sargassum, so it probably is even a greater threat because of the life that depends on the sargassum. Through that research, I learned that off our coast is one of the most biodiverse locations, perhaps in the world. And not only that, it has 16 endangered species that rely on our coastal waters. And so when we think about the plastics that can impact anything from plankton all the way up to blue whales, that means that every one of these species can be negatively impacted by these plastics. So we decided that since no news station is picking up what's happening in the North Atlantic, and it has a very important story to tell, we decided to take the research that we've been doing, as well as other researchers in North Carolina, and tell their story through a documentary that's called If the Ocean Could Talk. Now, we're still working on its production, but I thought I would share with you just this short video. It has some lightheartedness to it. So I will share that now.
Come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I wanna tell you how much I love you. Do you remember when we met? That's the day I knew you were my pet. Oh, get out of there, man. I can't. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in the sargassum.
So you might have noticed all of that was shot in one day. So this wasn't a combination of stuff that we've seen over time. But you could see the plastic on the surface, and then just like the film in Indonesia, it was underneath the surface as well. So if you were on a boat and you were cruising along, you might go right through that and never know it was there. So now that we know why we need to flatten the curve, let's now talk about how we can do it. So I use the expression, you know, it's in your hands, right? Because we're the ones that are actually buying the stuff off the shelf, right? So if we don't use it, we cannot lose it. And that's something that, it sounds so simple, but it really is one of the key things that has a huge impact on what is on the shelves. So for example, large industries only have to lose about 4% of their bottom line for them to pay attention that there's a problem. So we don't have to get everyone on board. We just need to get enough people to reduce how much money these corporations are bringing in for them to start saying, okay, what's the problem? What do we need to change? And that's how we can impact what's on the shelves. Other ways we can do that is to buy in bulk. Use the same containers over and over again. You can go to Tidal Creek or Whole Foods, or some of your local businesses that do provide stuff in bulk. Buy local. You know, when we buy local, when we buy from our local farmers, it hasn't been shipped across the country. So there's a less carbon footprint as well as less packaging. And when we think about even soap, right? So a lot of us like those body washes that are in a plastic container. Well, you're mostly paying for the bottle and the water that's in that container. Find a local person that makes soap. You'll know exactly the ingredients that are in it, and you'll know that it doesn't require all the packaging or the shipping. And then buying from companies that use less or the least amount of packaging. So for example, I use a company for my shampoo and conditioner. It's called Plain Products. They use an aluminum can, they send it to your house, and then when you're done with it, you send it back so that it can be refilled. They just use the cardboard boxes and they reuse the cardboard boxes that they come in as well. And then there's other ways, like learn how to do DIY, right? Do it yourself. So for example, I make my own toothpaste, right? And once you start doing things like that, you know exactly the ingredients that you're putting in your mouth and on your body. And then lastly, I mentioned use your voice. You know, you can reach out to companies and tell them, you know, I don't want all this plastic packaging. And if enough people speak up, they do listen. And the other voice we can use is use our voice with our legislators. So one of the things that we've been working on is the Blue New Deal Coalition. And we're working not only with other nonprofit organizations, but also with industry and our federal government to start talking about how do we build a circular economy around our waste. Because we're just throwing so much of these materials away that could be reused over and over again. So More Recycling is a really good company that's now working with industry to help them figure out where are the leaks, where are these plastics that don't have a home ending up. And some of that means we have to legislate to get some of the chemicals out of plastics in order to make them more recyclable, and also come up with ways to make it more affordable. So why the plastic recycling really isn't working is because the virgin plastics are so much more cheaper. So we need to figure out a way to level that playing field so that the supply and demand for recycled material is as strong as the virgin plastics. So that leads to legislation, and there are some legislations that just happened most recently. Break Free from Plastic is now an act that's being reviewed, and the Save Our Seas Act actually was passed. So the Save Our Seas Act is more dealing with marine debris, and the Break Free from Plastic is helping figure out how can we get our government to step up to help facilitate recycling and better labeling for the packaging. How can we get our government to take some of the subsidies that are given to the oil and gas industry to take care of the back end of the problem? So these are some of the initiatives that we're working on in order to help create the circular economy so we can create jobs out of plastic waste. One more thing I would like to mention is that we used to have over 300 recycling facilities. In other words, they were taking recycled materials and repelletizing it and selling it. But the industry that was selling the virgin plastic started underselling it and made it impossible for these companies to exist. So we're down to about 40 of these companies in the United States. We're sending our plastics to China. China no longer is taking most of our recyclables. So now we have the surplus of plastics. So if we can get enough of us to get behind legislation to really insist that we put some money in the recycling systems, we can bring back those jobs and we can bring back that economy that will help facilitate the circular economy that we desperately need so that we can keep these plastics out of the ocean. I'll end by telling you that, as many of you know, with what we're dealing with, the PFOAs and the PFAS and the Gen X in our water, that we just don't have the political will to be looking out for our people. And even the EPA's hands are tied in most cases. So we are starting a Plastic Ocean Project Research and Innovation Center in order to have a place where people can bring any type of material that they're questioning. We can then give it a Plastic Ocean Project or a POP certification to say that we've tested this and it looks safe, or this is a problem, and then we can start communicating with the businesses instead of we're emphasizing so much on bans. So this is just a couple of pictures of the lab that we have off campus right now. And we have students looking at everything from plastics in dog food, plastics in the ocean, plastics in our fish, and also doing research on plastics to fuel and seeing if that is probably a good way to at least get rid of the plastics and repurpose it for something that we desperately need. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for being on today and the Coastal Land Trust for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. It's such good information. And thank you for leaving us with some of the what we can do. I would love to hear other things that we're curious about. What other questions do those of you that are on the call have for Bonnie about this issue? Just feel free to unmute your microphone and ask. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Or type it into the chat to me, that's fine too. Cool, Linda, thank you for sharing it with your friends. The video of today will be posted on our website at coastallandtrust.org/lectures a little bit later today.
Stephanie, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Dana Sargent. Hi, Bonnie.
Hey, how you doing, Dana? Great to see you.
How are you doing? So, I've been talking, from guidance and knowledge from you about how we link climate change to the plastics issue. And it came from back one of the times when you finally, you filled me in on this idea of all the oil it takes to produce plastic and how the oil industry is now, they're worried about fossil fuels becoming fossilized and switching their gears towards plastic. And I just it occurred to me, I was watching The Story of Plastic, that film, and they brought up in that film something that surprised the heck out of me. And it was about the Keep America Beautiful folks with whom we partner with, the Keep New Hanover Beautiful, Dick Brightman and those folks. Dick's on our board, and we do cleanups with them. But the film mentioned that group was basically created by the plastics industry to kind of help message the idea that we should keep creating plastic because look, we can recycle it. And so now with the fact that, we're talking about the plastics industry and the oil industry pushing more production and the issue that you mentioned about recycling becoming more and more difficult, I just wondered what your thoughts were on messaging all of that and relative to climate change, knowing that more oil that we extract from the land, whether it's for gas to run our cars or gas or oil to make plastic, is going to contribute to climate change. And I just had a hard time because it's so complex.
It's so complicated. It really is, for a lot of reasons, right? So I had mentioned more recycling. So they have this thing called the plastic paradox, because when we talk about shipping all of these goods and services all the way, all around the world, it is very lightweight, right? So like it does have a less carbon emissions because it's lighter than glass and even cardboard. But the part that is never discussed is how much energy did it take to process, not once do they refine the oil, but twice to make the plastics. So when we think about the amount of energy it takes, that when we're using 1.2 million barrels a day for plastic, how much energy are we consuming just to make the plastic? Oh, once it's made, it's great. But to me, with the life cycle needs to be looking at the whole picture, not just what we're transporting. And my son just sent me this just before the talk started. It said, how big oil misled the public into believing plastic would be recycled. And that was on NPR today. So wow. Yeah, it is a big reveal, and of course the Story of Plastic did a really great job at explaining that. And all those chemicals that we're finding in the plastic, a lot of them we're finding in our river, right? So all of those components need to be factored in when we start thinking, oh, plastic is better than cardboard, right? So yeah, unfortunately, that is a true statement about Keep America Beautiful. It was actually to protect the industry and to finger point at the consumer, right? You're the one doing this. But we're getting fewer and fewer options on what we can eat or drink out of. Now, I think COVID's been a really great example. When we were all locked down, we started figuring out like how to cook again, how to make our own stuff. And we gave the planet a break for a little while, and we saw how resilient it was. So imagine if all of us just decided that we're gonna just take a couple of things and we're just gonna reduce our use of plastics. Like I use the example of soap, right? Or toothpaste. Like imagine if we all just made some little changes just for starters. And then next thing you know, it becomes contagious, and you will feel healthier because it's no question these chemicals are leaching out of the plastics that we're eating and drinking out of, especially styrofoam. If I can encourage people to move away from one thing, and that's the styrofoam that we're putting hot coffee in or hot food. But yeah. It's a big mess.
Thank you.
Bonnie, there's a question in the chat about what is the best way to communicate with our elected officials to request to reduce the production of plastics.
Yeah, so there's a couple of them that are stepping up. So there is a change, and my theory is that some of them are getting older and getting ready to leave, so they're able to like really express what they care about. So Senator Udall is one of them. In fact, he's the one that introduced the Break Free from Plastic bill. Senator Whitehouse is another one. Sullivan. These are all legislators. Sullivan is actually a Republican, but he's the one that put the Save Our Seas Act into place. So go find out who they are. And you can even go on our website, the Blue New Deal, and you'll see like there is some movement in this direction of moving away from the plastics. But we have to be the ones that really are pushing hard, especially the ones that we've got their ear.
Bonnie, there are a couple comments on the Facebook page here. One from Maria says it's hard to avoid plastics during the pandemic and in healthcare settings right now. How has that been affected? How's that affecting what you're doing in your work?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a setback, right? So I have a cousin up in the Boston area, and he said that restaurants weren't even allowed to use silverware, that they had to give out plasticware. So yeah, these are really serious challenges with COVID, but there are a few workarounds. So I bring my own utensils. And when I order, I say, please don't give me any of the condiments, don't put any plasticware. And so these are little things that we can do to kind of thwart off all these plastic giveaways. And it really helps those restaurants too, right? They've been in peril because of, you know, they didn't have any business for several months. So when we don't take those things, then that's a less expense for them. So it works out in both directions. As far as the medical waste, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. I believe our hospital uses incineration to make energy out of a lot of the waste. Not the greatest way to go, but it's certainly better than ending up where it doesn't belong.
And then Angel just makes a comment. She says an example that next week Pender County is having a water drive for their schools because the water fountains are not turned on because of the virus transmission. She said it would be awesome to instead have the water fountains with foot levers to fill refillable bottles like found in the airports.
Yes, exactly. There are little workarounds, and if we really push for them, they can happen. But they don't happen from the top down. You know, it's got to be us using our voice to say this is not acceptable. We know too much about bottled water. It's under-regulated. We have no idea where it's coming from. We don't know what the water, where they got it. If it has the same kind of problem we do with Gen X, there's no one testing that water. So to assume that bottled water is safer is you're ill-informed, unfortunately. So better off taking big jugs to like Tidal Creek or Whole Foods and refilling it with RO water. And it's not that expensive.
Bonnie, do you know of a list of companies that do use smaller amounts of packaging? That it was mentioned as a bullet point, but is there like a list of where we could go find that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that there's a list of them, but if you look at the 1% for the Planet, that's a really great place to look because those are companies that are conscientious, that are trying to give back, and they usually do it in such a way that they're reducing their footprint as well.
Very good. And AmeriCorps, Ivana, I'm just meeting her for the first time today. I can't remember how you say your name. I'm sorry. Made a comment that Burgaw has a local CSA that's going to be starting back, and also a 2 thumbs up for Feast Down East. So those are some local companies that could really help us think more about, you know, staying local with our food sources, especially.
Right. Yes, of course. Love Feast Down East.
Yay. Ivana, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Stacy just mentioned in the comment about public goods, and they seem to be fairly eco-conscious, but do you know about that group?
I don't, but I'm going to write that one down because I love it. I get to learn from people as well when I give these talks. So
nice.
That's good.
And on your website, do you have any of these resources listed?
So yes, if you look at our website, I mean, there's so many links, so you really have to drill down. But yes, you can find on our website. You can also see the research that we've been doing. So we had a student look at BPA-free bottles to decide, you know, what were they putting in instead. And what we learned that even our control leached out toxic chemicals. Oh. So while we're focused on the BPA, there's a litany of other chemicals. So yeah.
Yeah. I think what I'll do is I'll include a link to the Plastic Ocean Project in the post of this talk today, so that people can go and you know, it'll just be available for when you're reviewing the lecture, to go over to plasticoceanproject.org and poke around and see about some other resources. So
yeah, as well as opportunities. We have a global ambassador program, so we're always looking for people that are doing good in their community. It's a way for us to highlight the work that they're doing, and then it's great, you know, especially if you're, you know, trying to build your resume.
Yep. So. And are you doing any volunteer organization during COVID, or kind of let that rest right now?
No, we've been doing cleanups. We've been getting out there. We do a couple a month. Our main focus is 421 out to the landfill. There's so much trash. So, and then we have a campaign, Trees for Trash. So for every 25 pounds of trash we pick up, we plant a tree. Last year we planted over 1,500 trees, oddly enough at the landfill. So we literally built a forest on top of debris from Hurricane Fran. So we call it Fran's Forest.
That's awesome. All right, and unless there are any other questions that come up in the next 1 second, Bonnie, thank you again. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your interest and your expertise and your research and advocacy with us. We do really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here today. We do have a couple of upcoming Little Lunch lectures next week. Marae Lindquist, also from UNCW, she's a doctoral student in biology and marine biology, and she will be here to talk about salt marsh sparrows and the impacts of sea level rise. And then the week after, on September 25th, Anne and Bland Simpson will be back with the Little Lunch lecture series. So back in March, several months ago, they took us on a tour of kind of all of Eastern North Carolina, but this time they're going to focus especially on the inner islands of North Carolina. And I don't really even know very much about this, so I'm super excited to learn from their, again, photos and stories of their travels. So that's September 25th. And then the day after, not a Little Lunch lecture, but you are all invited to join us for our annual celebration and fundraiser on Zoom on September 26th, 5 to 6:15 in the afternoon. And it will be a celebration of our year of conservation, some of the projects that we've completed this year, a look at kind of where we're headed in the future. And in order to get the Zoom link for that, please do RSVP. Van, stick the link in the chat. It's landtrust.org/RSVP. Kind of obvious, but we do hope that all of you will join us for that as well. So we'll see you next week for Little Lunch lectures. Have a great weekend, and everybody take care.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.